thank you all for sticking around to hang out with us for a little bit. Now, I'm sure you know a lot about the people on this stage, but just to kind of give you a 10-second memory refresh, Peter Bart, amongst many other things, was a production executive at Paramount, editor of Variety, columnist for Deadline, knows what he's talking about. Albert Berger, an Academy Award nominated producer of terrific movies like Nebraska, Little Miss Sunshine, Little Children, Ruby Sparks, a personal favorite of mine that if you haven't seen, you should see. And Bruce Vilanch, who has written for 25 Academy Award ceremonies, and those are just the ones he was credited for writing on.
And could I just say, for you football fans out there, I am not Travis Kelce's mother. What can I do?
Right. And my name is Dave Karger. I'm a host on Turner Classic Movies. I also wrote a book about the Oscars called 50 Oscar Nights. And I love the Oscars. So great to be with all of you. Peter, here's a question I want to get your take on. A few weeks ago, when the wildfires were raging in Los Angeles and just decimating everything, there was talk from several corners along the lines of maybe the Oscars shouldn't happen this year. Maybe they should do away with it, take the money that would have been made or spent, and donate it. And then I remember when I interviewed Nicole Kidman for my book, when she won her Oscar for The Hours, it was right after the Iraq War broke out. And she even in her speech said something like, why do we come to the Academy Awards when the world is in such turmoil? Because art is important. Where do you fall? Do you think the Oscars should be going on as planned, or should they have made a plan B?
Well, of course, the annual question is should there be an Oscars at all? Is really the whole process germane anymore? And of course, I always felt part of that, even though I have been voting as an Oscar member for 60 years. This is my 60th vote this year. So every year I too wonder, is this still sort of relevant to what all of us do and think? Now, in this case with fire, I certainly think that there was a place. It's, if anything, a good thing for the community to a degree get together and talk about movies, because there is a tendency in all of us to say that the theatrical movie is not relevant anymore today. If I may say briefly, on my first vote as an Oscar voter, I had the following terrible choice. I could either vote for The Graduate or Bonnie and Clyde. I would say my choice this year is not quite easy.
So if you were deciding between The Graduate and Bonnie and Clyde, that means you weren't considering the eventual winner that year in the heat of the night.
My vote actually went to a picture I produced, which was a very serious picture called Revenge of the Nerds. We had to make it 4 times until people finally got the joke.
The only movie I can think of with a character named Booger. Revenge of the Nerds. Albert, it's so funny because for me in my movie-obsessed life, all the people that I surround myself with, from Labor Day weekend on, we're all obsessing over Honora and Amelia Perez when we see these movies at the Telluride Film Festival. And then in January, this happens every year, the nominations come out and I'm talking to actual people about movies and they go, what are these movies? Now, I've never heard of it. What's The Brutalist? What's your take on the relevance of the Oscars? I feel like it waxes and wanes. When there's Barbenheimer, everyone really cares about the Oscars. But then when there's a lot of movies that people haven't seen, there's less interest. What's your take on it?
Well, I think since they've enlarged till 10, there's a nice, variation of movies to consider. When you have Wicked and Dune, that's a whole side of things. And then you've got Honora and some of the international films that are, excellent this year. but a couple of them up for Best Picture. So it's I think you get a little of everything these days, and which is good. It keeps people connected and interesting, and of course, this year there's the unpredictability to factor in as well as controversy. So it's I think it's a exciting year. And to your first question, I mean, for anybody that saw the Grammys, I thought they were great this year, and it was really a helpful way to deal with, I mean, they helped the whole situation with the recovery from the fire as well as took your mind off things. It was pretty great, I thought, so.
Bruce, can you think of an example from one of the years that you wrote on the telecast where there was extenuating circumstances in the real world that you had to think about?
Yeah, well, there was the one Nicole you mentioned. I wrote that show. That was
2002.
the most. Yeah, 2002. That was they'd invaded Iraq, and tensions were quite high. And as I told in the other panel, Michael Moore won, I think, that for Bowling for Columbine that year, and he was booed by the stagehands because he did an anti-George Bush speech as part of his acceptance. And I was in the wings with Steve Martin, and we said, well, we can't let this go by. And so when we came out of commercial, Steve went out and said, it's lovely backstage. The stagehands are helping Michael Moore into the trunk of his car. So sometimes it works to your advantage. I'd just like to say to the point to the first question, if you cancel the Oscar show, there is no revenue to donate to fire relief.
Right. It was an easy thing to say.
I mean, so it's easy to say, just cancel it. But it's kind of jejune. And also it puts me out of a job.
Right.
So when Jean Smart said that, I called her and I said, why don't they just cancel Hacks and you put your money to fire relief? And she said, point taken. And we remain friends.
Because, Jean Smart, the star of Hacks, she was the one who was kind of leading this, parade of people saying that, which I thought was, that's a great point. But on one hand, I was like, okay, Jean, because a lot of these award shows are honoring you, so good on you for saying I don't want the award, but
no.
There are a lot of people who
There's
would.
a whole industry behind it. I mean, caterers and drivers and a whole bunch of people who depend on that revenue stream. And it's capricious to just cancel it on a philosophical point. You have to take everything into consideration.
Peter, who would you say has the biggest upside to winning an Oscar? Is it a distributor like Searchlight or A24? Is it a producer who gets the boost? Is it someone below the line, as we say, in the technical categories? Is it an actor? Or does it all just depend on the situation?
You mean who gets the biggest upside in
they win.
victory? That's a tough one. I mean, so often a director's career is created by winning the Oscar. But on the other hand, if you think of those filmmakers for the last few years who have won Oscars, we haven't heard that much from the director of Nomadland or the director of Birdman or even the director of Coda. So it is no longer a free ticket to great celebrity, which is also a reminder of how tough it is to have a career as a filmmaker and to really build it. But certainly in my epoch at Paramount, the biggest winners were Francis Coppola and Steven Spielberg, who everyone sort of decided, they invented the film industry. And they were certainly had the greatest rewards in terms of celebrity and the freedom to make any picture they wanted. I mean, people forget that Spielberg and Coppola and George Lucas, their first pictures were small art pictures. They didn't instantly graduate to these $100 million epics. I mean, Francis Coppola's budget on his first picture was $2 million.
Just for my curiosity, before we start talking about the controversy surrounding the movie with the most nominations this year, Emilia Perez, raise your hand if you're aware of the controversy surrounding this movie. So like a good 75% of the room, and you guys are movie lovers, that's why you're here, but that's really interesting to me. Albert, if you were the producer of Emilia Perez, and you've spent years working on this movie, and it goes to Cannes, and it wins Best Actress, and this historical win for 4 women, and then it gets 13 nominations, and then the whole thing just implodes. What would that be like? What must that be like for everyone involved in that film?
Oh, it's got to be a nightmare. I mean, I think they're all pulling their hair out. And, and then, of course, there's all the questions as to whether or not they had looked at her posts from before and all of that. But I do think I'll be interested to see whether this turns around a little bit or not. I think, I mean, the conventional wisdom is it's dead, it's over. But it's such a complicated issue when on the one hand you have, I thought a brilliant performance by a transgender actor at a moment in time, at this moment in time. On the other hand, I mean, obviously she said a lot of very unpleasant things. And, the question, of course, comes up, are we voting for a humanitarian award or are we voting for, the best performance? And, and it's a decent year in that category, so there are other choices. But, I think everybody has to, really try and digest this and see where they land.
Bruce, can you imagine being a writer on the telecast this year and having to contend with Carla Sofia Gascon's Twitter account? Like, how would you, not to say come up with a joke right now, but how would you even like try to address that?
I think you might just use approach avoidance and not do it at all.
Right.
But I think Conan will probably have some kind of joke that will refer to things from people's past coming to bite them in their ass. That is probably an appropriate way to handle it. And I think the movie is still alive. I think that she's dead in that category. And I was interested to see that the original plan was to have something that we initiated in 2009, which was to have 5 previous winners come out and each one lionize one of the nominees. And since nobody would come out to say anything about her, they
Right.
eliminated that from the lead categories and only doing it supporting, and selected below the line categories. I thought that was a nice way to get around the fact that they changed their mind.
Right, because because I had heard they were doing that Hall of Fame thing, and I thought, okay, great. But then I read that the 4 past winners were coming back. Well, let's touch on some of these main categories and give people a head start on their Oscar pool. So for Best Picture, it's fairly easy to remember the nominees because it goes in this cool alphabetical way. There's Anora, there's The Brutalist, Conclave, A Complete Unknown, Dune, Emilia Perez, and then you have Wicked, and I'm Still Here, which is the Brazilian film, and Nickel Boys, which I think is really great. What do you guys think? I personally feel like it's between A Complete Unknown and The Brutalist as far as the 2 that could win. I don't think Emilia Perez, which has the most nominations, can win. I just don't see it happening. What do you think?
My feeling is hardly anyone has seen any of these pictures.
Right. But the voters have.
Well, that's why I did a piece.
Not enough of them.
I did a piece.
Just enough to get a nomination.
Right. I did a piece this morning which reminded us that Bill Goldman, the great screenwriter, had proposed some years ago that the vote actually be announced. So the Academy doesn't just say the winner is, but gives us the details.
Yes.
Interesting insight this year would be have people actually seen, and I think the figure is about 37% of the audience has actually seen any of these pictures.
The television audience.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I think that given that, this year, perhaps more than any, we're all sort of struggling in the dark, trying to figure out what was that picture about. And it's like, I liked September 5th. It was impossible to see September 5th because you can't find it anywhere. It had a theatrical run of 1 hour, and it's going to be released digitally in 2 days. So once again, we're all dancing in the dark here, it seems to me. The public is.
Well, and also to win the Best Picture Oscar, it's this interesting, for those of you who aren't aware, all the voters, and both of you are voters, right?
Yeah.
All the voters in every other category, make sure I'm getting this right, just pick the one movie or actor that they want to win. But for Best Picture, they have to rank all 10. They're told to rank all 10 of the movies. And what happens is all the votes are counted, all the number one votes are counted, and there's no way that one movie is going to get 51% of the vote on the first ballot when there's 10 nominees. But they take the movie that came in 10th place that has no chance of winning, and they take all those people's ballots, take them back. Their number one vote's not going to count because they voted for whatever movie came in 10th place. And then they look at those people's number two choice, and so on and so on and so on until one movie has 51% of the vote. This is a long way of saying that in order to win Best Picture, you can't just be a movie that some people love. You have to be a movie that is basically on almost everyone's ballot in the top 5. And I think that's a case against Emilia Perez winning because you'll have a lot of people putting it number 1, but I would argue that people who are not putting Emilia Perez at number 1 are not then putting it 2, 3, 4, or 5. They're putting it at 8, 9, or 10. So I think you need to be a movie that is a consensus movie, which is why some people are predicting that A Complete Unknown, which is the Bob Dylan biopic, can win because that's a movie that it might not be everyone's number 1, but it's going to be a lot of people's number 2, 3, or 4. Does that make sense to you guys?
I got to just say that as a writer of these broadcasts, the Academy Awards is the only award show that's televised that's voted on by people who make movies. Everything else is a critics thing, or the People's Choice is people at the mall in Cabazon. Gallup goes and asks them questions. I mean, it is really, and the actors vote for SAG, and et cetera, et cetera. So this is the only one that's completely voted on by people who actually make movies. Since the Academy diversified itself, upped the membership is now younger, more diverse, less Hollywood-centric, less studio-oriented. So they nominate 10, almost all independent movies. Their thinking is that way. This does not necessarily, these are movies they would like to have made. This doesn't jibe with movies that people would like to have seen.
That's right.
So that's part of the reason why there's a drought in people who actually know what the movies are to begin with. And that gets reflected in the voting. And when you see some of the stuff that wins, you will say, well, people who made the movies thought that was great. But in the Best Picture category, I think Dave's exactly right. It'll be the consensus choice, which will be probably not the choice of a lot of people. Listen, 10, 15 years ago, you would not see movies like Parasite or Everything Everywhere All Over Your Face or whatever that was, Moonlight, 12 Years a Slave. They would not have won Best Picture. But the tone of the Academy, the membership has changed, the people who actually vote.
Well, much more international.
Much more.
So hence there's 2 international films in the Best Picture. I think I would add Conclave to your consensus theory because that's just a solid movie and something that you don't see very often. It's got some old-fashioned storytelling qualities. So, I mean, that along with A Complete Unknown. The Brutalist is a whole different kettle of fish. But anyway, it's completely unpredictable this year.
But Albert, don't you think if the Academy is more international, it seems to me, then let's see what happens to Emilia Perez.
Yeah.
Because I know there's a great piece in The Economist this week in which they basically said that all over the world, audiences hated Emilia Perez. and in Mexico, of course, they walked out. But Hollywood, as reflected in the Golden Globes, for reasons that escape me, venerate that movie. I think it's an ultimate work of art. I think it's a unique work of confusion.
I think, one could make a case for the last third of The Brutalist, too, as being a kind of mess. But anyway, it's ambitious, and it gets a lot of points for ambition. But
well, what's interesting is that, there was this period, I'm thinking of the kind of turn of the millennium in 1999, 2000, 2001, 2002, where it seemed like every year the Best Picture race came down between a film that was distributed by DreamWorks, the Steven Spielberg, David Geffen, Jeffrey Katzenberg company, and Miramax, the Harvey Weinstein company. And every year it was these two. And they were both experts. They each had really great awards consulting teams who were great at not only boosting and beefing up their own movies, but tearing down in this kind of whisper campaign way the competition. And now it's almost like these people don't need to do this because TikTok is doing it for them. I mean, every time I go on, there's another person tearing down Emilia Perez, and just, I thought it was a really good movie, but I think it put itself under a magnifying glass by getting the most nominations, and then everyone, wants to say how much they hate it.
It was something for them because it got lots of nominations from filmmakers who understood it and enjoyed the experience. So it was seen by a lot of people who never would have seen it, and they were not so crazy about it. And so there is that backlash, and her history fueled the backlash. It just kind of like turned the fire into a disaster.
Yeah.
And also the interesting thing is because it's up for Best International Film as well as Best Picture, the conventional wisdom is, they'll, I don't need to vote for it for this because of that, but it could really hurt it in this case on top of all the controversy, just because I don't even know where people are getting, I mean, maybe it wins international, it doesn't win picture, but who knows?
I still think it will win international. So interestingly, there has been more often lately a split between the Best Picture winner and the Best Director winner. So Jane Campion will win for The Power of the Dog, but then Coda, a movie that wasn't even nominated for Best Director, will win Best Picture. Same thing happened when Roma won for Best Director, and Green Book, which wasn't even nominated for Best Director, won Best Picture. I wonder if a similar thing could happen this year, and the brutalist Brady Corbet, who objectively made the biggest kind of cinematic achievements, 3.5 hours long. It's this big sprawling epic. He could win Best Picture, but maybe a complete unknown, or as everyone says, the Bob Dylan movie, will win Best Picture. Do you see that possibly happening?
Yeah, I think he's likely to win, Brady Corbet, and then the question becomes which of the the kind of movies that has the most consensus backing emerges, and as I said, I think it could be Conclave, it could be a complete unknown.
Yeah.
Do you think there's some relevance to the fact that the public, if you go listen to panels, hear that everything is very political, but the audience, I think, is probably uniquely unpolitical. And yet there is a political subtext in all the nominated pictures. And I'm not sure that reflects the mood of the public. It may exacerbate this problem that no one wants to see movies.
Well, also, there's a lot of cases where the kind of echo chamber of film journalism, which is now really film Twitter, decides to be all outraged and up in arms about something, and then that person wins. Monique, outraged because she wouldn't go to this film festival or do this campaign stop. She won. Melissa Leo for The Fighter, outraged that she dared to put out her own kind of off-color, for your consideration ads that were tacky. She won. Green Book, oh, this movie is just so offensive and horrible. It won. So oftentimes what we're reading about on film Twitter by a certain segment of the population, you have to remember that that's not the way the Academy is thinking.
No, I mean, in Hollywood, we're thinking Green Book was a white savior movie.
Right.
And it's so old hat to have the white guy coming in and taking care of the black guy. But I think the general public, isn't it nice to see that happening?
Right, yeah.
And it's a relevant thought to them.
Bruce, I want to ask you about one movie that did surprisingly very well at the nominations overall this year, and that's The Substance, getting nominations for Best Picture, Director, Screenplay, and supporting and lead actress for Demi Moore and makeup. I remember seeing that movie this summer and being so grossed out, but thinking it was really well done, and saying to myself, that's a great movie, but no way is that an Academy movie. And then look at all the nominations.
I think when you have 10, then there's room for it, because it's an Academy movie in the sense that it's about Hollywood. It's about an aging woman. It's about plastic surgery. It's science fiction applied to all of that. So it's inventive. And it's bringing back an actress who's always been neglected and never thought of as a serious actress, something that she can literally chew on.
Right.
So I think the combination was what brought voters to it. And I have to say, it did get a boost from her speech at the Golden Globes. Traditionally, if you win and you make a great speech at the Golden Globes, that gives you a leg up on the Oscars. I mean, I remember when Kathy Bates won the Golden Globe for Misery. And people thought, who's Kathy Bates? She's a character actress. She starred in the Stephen King movie. And she gave this phenomenal speech, which is, I don't even remember, but I remember it was phenomenal. And of course, she won the Oscar. I'm convinced she won the Oscar off of that speech.
Well,
And so is she.
Demi Moore is definitely the anti-Carla Sofia Gascon. She's doing everything right.
Right,
And I think for the voters, what I often try to, when I used to do the predictions for Entertainment Weekly magazine, thank God I don't really have to do that as much anymore. But I used to think to myself, what is going to feel like, because I always try to put myself in your minds, right? What's going to feel like the most interesting and exciting choice in each category for a voter? And I think the voters having the ballots in front of them are going to look at Demi Moore's name and think, that's going to be freaking cool if she wins an Oscar for this movie because she did a great job. The movie's totally crazy and out there, and she's so modest and likable. So I think she's got that in the bag. Do you guys see anyone beating her?
Well, Fernanda Torres is she won the Globe, right? And she's great. And I'm not sure enough people are going to see I'm Still Here, but that's a wonderful movie. All the international films are great this year that are nominated and really worth seeing. So.
What about you, Peter? What's your take on Best Actress?
I couldn't hear you.
What's your take on Best Actress? Who do you think you think Demi Moore is going to win?
I really don't know. You got me on that. I think that one issue that I miss, though, in that subject is the fact that what was great about Oscar period was anger. Everybody in Hollywood was screaming at everyone else, and there were really arguments about actors and about pictures, and when it was, you can't mention his name, but Harvey, that he would ferociously campaign for a movie, and you'd get into things like The English Patient and pictures of his that people really ferociously opposed. And what galvanized Hollywood about the Oscars, and to a degree the voters, was the sheer anger between Shakespeare in Love or E.T. and Gandhi, and these pictures where you couldn't, the easiest way to start an argument as well as a conversation is to talk about the Oscars. And I think everyone is awfully bland today. There's no one really fighting about anything. No one's pissed off. And as a result, most people you talk to who are Academy members haven't really seen these movies.
That's a
It's
shame.
weird, isn't it? Because they can download. The year of COVID, where they did the show at the train station, you couldn't see any of the movies in theaters. You could see every single movie sitting on your couch. It had the lowest ratings ever. It went below 10 million for the first time because nobody had even bothered to turn on the TV to watch Nomadland.
Yeah.
And that was what won Best Picture.
Right.
So I thought it's kind of staggering. You know, you can bring them the food they won't eat. The weirdest thing. But I think that that's still a holdover thing. I think that they're so available and there's such a torrent of films now that things are back in production that they just I mean, really, who's had 4 hours to give The Brutalist? I just assumed it was a musical with a weird title. Because it had an intermission.
Yeah.
I was told. No, it's about architecture. But
I do tell people, if you haven't seen The Brutalist, and maybe many of you haven't because of the running time, it's actually not that scary, guys. It's an hour and 40 minutes, and then a built-in 15-minute intermission, and then another hour and 40 minutes. It's actually 2 short movies that you watch back-to-back with a nice restroom break. It's very doable, and it's a very pleasant way to spend your
perfect
afternoon.
for the iPick, where you can.
Yeah, exactly. I thought it was great.
Yeah, well, speaking of spending your afternoon, I mean, conversely to your point, going to theaters, I think there is a new kind of energy happening with theatrical, and it's so much better to see movies that way, and I think it enhances the you know, the amount of people watching the Oscars and everything. It sustains the whole ecosystem.
The biggest ratings that the show has is always when you have a huge film. Titanic is still
Lord of the Rings.
the biggest one. Lord of the Rings.
Barbenheimer.
Barbenheimer was a perfect example. When popular things are nominated, people tune in.
But also when popular things are predicted to win. I think just the fact that you have Dune and Wicked in the top 10 this year isn't going to move the needle as much as if everybody was saying, oh, watch out, Wicked's going to sweep.
But
Yeah, well, that's interesting.
David,
I mean,
don't you feel a real subtext about the industry per se is that it's owned by Netflix? That we could talk about movies, all this, but Netflix in terms of profits, in terms of revenues, and the amount of product, 80 movies a year. I mean, Netflix owns the entertainment industry to a degree that would be, no one would have ever guessed it a generation ago. And now I have to be careful what I say, because two of my grandchildren work for Netflix. Nonetheless, it runs the show.
Well,
Although ironically, they've never won Best
They've
Picture,
never
and
won
this
Best
was the
Picture.
year that I think they were counting on it.
it's still not going to happen. Yeah, but they've come close. Power of the Dog won Best Director, lost Best Picture. Roma won Best Director, lost Best Picture.
It should have won.
Yeah, sure. I think there are some people who don't want to vote for a movie because it's a Netflix movie and they don't think it deserves it as much as a theatrical release. With the time that we have left, I want to touch on some of the other main categories. We haven't really talked about Best Actor, which is a great category this year. Sebastian Stan for The Apprentice, a bit of a surprise nominee. Coleman Domingo getting 2 nominations in a row, last year for Rustin, this year for Sing Sing. Ray Fiennes, kind of the Lifetime Achievement nominee for Conclave, kind of amazing. It's only his 3rd nomination ever. Timothy Chalamet, who if he does win, will beat Adrian Brody by a couple days and become the youngest Best Actor winner of all time. And then Adrian Brody, the only person who's nominated for an Oscar in acting this year who's won before. And I think Adrian Brody, it's between him and Timothy Chalamet. A lot of people that I respect, Clayton Davis at Variety, Scott Feinberg at Hollywood Reporter, are predicting Timothy Chalamet. I would love that. I hope that they're right. If I were doing a ballot, I would say Adrian Brody. What's everyone else?
Well, I haven't had the weekend to see The Brutalist.
Oh, right.
But I will do it before. I thought Chalamet was fine. He mumbled Bob Dylan well. I question how many people give a rat's ass about Bob Dylan. I mean, I saw it in an audience of 20 people who all dressed like Bob Dylan in the period, myself included. And I wondered if anybody else was interested in seeing the picture, and because it really captures a certain point in time, which if you were alive, is interesting and you remember. But if you're Chalamet's age, I don't think there are a whole lot of Chalamets who are that interested in the thing, and they vote too. But they love him, so
It did pretty well, though.
If it came down to it, I think that he could win. I don't know. It could be if enough people see The Brutalist, they might go with age.
It has done well, right?
Yeah, it has. The movie did well. Yeah, and I think that's the choice, the two of them. I kind of think Chalamet will probably win just because it's something new and exciting. But they were both great. They were great.
Well, he's good. He's been nominated before,
Yeah.
and he's a movie star. He carries a picture, which is unusual in this day and age.
Peter?
If he's not in spandex with a gun.
Right. No.
With a flamethrower, superpower. His superpower in this thing is he plays harmonica, so it's not exactly.
Well, Timothy Chalamet has been in like 7 Best Picture nominees in the last 7 years.
He's awesome.
I mean, he's
high profile and good movies.
He's the good luck charm.
Well-received movie.
Peter, do you dare to make a Best Actor prediction for us?
Oh, I agree about Timothy. I think he's got his own very quiet charisma, and he gets his photo taken with the right people. And I think he's got it.
Let's talk about the supporting categories. And the Best Supporting Actress category has become a little bit more interesting in the last few weeks, I would argue, because of all of the negativity surrounding Emilia Perez, because Zoe Saldana, who's nominated in supporting but is really a lead in Emilia Perez, along with Carla Sofia Gascon, I would say.
That often just gets it for you.
That often makes you
Julia
win.
Binoche.
Yeah, Alicia Vikander.
Gina Davis.
Right, if you're a lead role that manages to hoodwink people and get nominated in supporting, you have a great chance to win. But she's nominated up against, Isabella Rossellini for a very short performance there. Yeah. Also Felicity Jones from The Brutalist, and Ariana Grande from Wicked, and of course Monica Barbaro, who plays Joan Baez in A Complete Unknown. But I think if I had to say who's in second place to Zoe Saldana, and the reason this has come up is that I have read some articles of journalists who are talking to Oscar voters who are saying, because of the Carla Sofia Gascon controversy, I'm now less likely to vote for Emilia Perez, not only just in her category, but in any category, which I think is a real shame. And I think that if Zoe Saldana ends up losing after being the front runner for the whole season, I think people will forever say it's because of tweets, that someone else's tweets, that she didn't win. But I do think she's going to still win. But I imagine if we were to have learned the vote count, it would be a little bit closer. Is there anyone, Albert, that you think can beat her?
Isabella Rossellini. It's funny, everybody is saying, oh, it's such a small role, but that's the supporting actor.
Her mother won an Oscar for a role just as small.
Yeah.
Murder on the Orient Express.
I think she's got a real chance, but yeah, also, yeah, I think Zoe Saldana was great, and so, that it's a nice choice there. The whole conversation made me remember Bruce Stern in Nebraska, who Paramount was desperate to get him to run as a supporting actor, and he refused. He said, I'd never get the lead in a movie, and he got nominated. He didn't win. He would have won easily supporting actor, but I admire that it wasn't a supporting performance. He was the lead of the movie. So.
Last year.
Bruce, to your categories, comedy. The supporting actresses in old days used to be people who stole the show because they were funny. Now, I think the last comedy to even, as a movie, to be in contention was, Annie Hall in the 1860s?
Well, Green Book.
No, in the acting categories? Or?
Yeah.
Oh, in acting.
Mira Sorvino won for
Mighty
Cousin
Aphrodite.
Vinny. Not for she
Oh,
won for
Marissa
the,
Tomei. Marissa Tomei.
Marissa Tomei, but Mira won for a comedy, also
Aphrodite,
Woody
sure.
Allen picture.
Yeah.
Woody Allen pictures, or Diane Wiest won twice for Woody Allen movies. So
Mercedes Rule. Kevin Kline. He won for Fish Call Wanda, which is one of my favorite
that was
Oscar
also a
wins.
leading role that they
In
put
it, right.
in support.
These all a long time ago, to Peter's point, but it's too bad, though, huh? Because comedy is not nothing to sneeze at.
The Academy is always kind of anti-comedy in a way. I mean, you look at the breakdown and stuff. They would, if it was a serious picture, they'd go for it quicker than it was hard to have a. I mean, Steve Martin's never been nominated. He's done some wonderful comic work.
Right.
A lot of people like that. Just don't get a shot because they have to do some sort of a clinical alcoholic role, and you go, oh, the range, and then they vote for you.
Another example of someone who did the Bruce Dern thing was Lily Gladstone, the star of Killers of the Flower Moon last year. They were telling her, go in supporting and you'll win an Oscar. And she said, no, I am the lead actress in this film. And she lost to Emma Stone. Let's touch on supporting actor real quick, because I would argue that's another category that seemed to have a sure thing winner, front runner lock. And I do still think Kieran Culkin will win for the movie A Real Pain. But because that movie did not get nominated for Best Picture, it was only nominated for him and the screenplay, I don't think it's as sure a thing as necessarily we thought. So there's Edward Norton, who of all the 20 acting nominees is the one who's been nominated the most. This is his 4th career nomination, arguably someone who should have an Academy Award. He's great. And then Guy Pearce, a first-time nominee for The Brutalist. Also Yura Borisov, who's a great scene stealer who doesn't say much in Anora. And then, of course, Jeremy Strong, Kieran Culkin's former Succession castmate, who plays Roy Cohn in The Apprentice. I do still think that Kieran Culkin will win, and I love that performance. Have you seen A Real Pain?
Yeah, he's wonderful, and I think he has a lot of momentum. I also think a lot of the voters saw him on Succession, and they've gotten into him and his rhythm, and I think that he probably will emerge from it.
Does anyone else have a chance? Does Edward Norton have a chance?
I thought you made a good point about Edward Norton. I personally thought Kieran Culkin, but especially that Russian dude in Anora, he was incredible. Yeah. But I guess he's the Rambo of Russia. I didn't realize.
He's a big deal in Russia.
But But yeah, Kieran Culkin is great in that movie, and that's a great movie for those people who haven't seen it. A real pain.
And it's short. It's like 92 minutes.
There you go.
Yeah.
You can see it three
come to
times
this.
instead of The Brutalist. Right.
But I think
You'll love it. It's short.
one area of nominations is which filmmaker or which actors are best supporting their pictures. Because after all, more than ever this year, the Oscar hustle is very competitive. And I don't think that there's ever been a director who is as shrewd as Jesse Eisenberg in terms of talking about his picture in a way that, A, you really think it's funny, which it isn't, and that it's really about Jewish people and the Holocaust, which it isn't. But he has a brilliant rap. And I think, boy, there are not many filmmakers left who can talk about their pictures in a way that actually engage an audience.
It's really true.
Bruce, let me end with you with one question. We touched on Conan O'Brien, who's going to be the host this year for the first time. What do you think he's going to be like? Do you think he's a good choice for this time, for this year, when you look at the people he's going to have writing for him? How are you feeling about how that's all going to shake down?
I think he's a good choice because he's a good stand-up and he's been a good host on his show. Everybody who's there in the audience knows him. They've been on one of his shows over the years, and he's fresh. He's never done it before, so he's going to have that kind of energy, and they're going to be with him because they want him to succeed. So I think that he doesn't come with any kind of, they've seen Kimmel 3 times in a row, and doesn't come with any of that kind of stuff. And he's not mean-spirited, which is the key. You can make jokes about them, but you have to be on their level, and the jokes have to be funny, but you're not pointing something mean at them. Yeah. And that's what gets the reaction in the room.
Before I send everyone off on their merry way, I'm not asking you guys who you're voting for. I'm not asking you who your #1 pick was. But I want to go down the line. If you could tell this audience one movie that maybe if they haven't seen yet, that you would really encourage them to see that's in the Oscar world this year, what would it be? And mine would be Anora. It's my favorite movie of the year. If you haven't seen it, that's the one I've heard a lot of people say, what is this movie? It's great, it's out there, it's racy, but it's terrific and a lot of fun. What would yours be?
It would be Amelia Perez because I thought it was a great ride. I wasn't confused. I was delighted by it. And it's a real Hollywood movie. I mean, with gangsters, with love interest, with bizarre twists. I had a great time at it. And I think that's what, ambitious filmmaking is about.
Albert, recommendation?
Well, I'd say any of the international films. There's one called Girl with a Needle, which is insanely dark, but it's an incredible movie. And also, I just want to mention A Better Man, which basically got nothing, but that is a wild, original, bold movie.
Biopic
it's the one
about
with
the singer Robbie Williams, played by a chimpanzee.
A chimpanzee is playing the main character, which sounds weird, and it is weird, but it's like a musical, though. And I don't like musicals per se, but this blew my mind. So, yeah.
Peter, recommendation for the audience before we leave?
I would go with you on Anora. I really would. Absolutely.
Anora's great.
Now,
it's a great movie.
One thing I would add, though, about the subject of the host, because so much of people talk about the Oscar host should be likable and add some warmth to the. And as I recall, for 40 years, you probably can correct me, Bob Hope was the host, who was, and I actually got to know him. He's one of the meanest people. I remember one time he and you could feel that in the way he talks to people. One time he invited me to lunch, and at his home is filled with this bric-a-brac, all the awards he got from all of these little groups around the country. And I finally said, Bob, forgive me for asking, but why do you keep all this stuff? And he said, who would want this shit?
All I can say is Peter Bart and I agree on a movie. I'm quitting while I'm ahead.
Yep.
Thank you very much to Bruce and Albert and Peter. Thanks for coming.